My tech bro BL demanded $10,000 for a blown grid until my solar logs revealed his midnight secret. For 3 years, my brother-in-law Richard ruled over his detached luxury workshop like a high-tech fortress, continuously boasting about the delicate, hypersensitive electrical grid he had installed to run his boutique CNC machinery. When our local power grid suffered a catastrophic transformer failure that melted thousands of dollars of his specialized equipment, Richard immediately pointed the finger at my 16-year-old son, Leo. He claimed Leo had snuck into the workshop to plug in a massive, unapproved custom PC gaming rig, overloading the delicate circuit breakers. Backed by my husband's family, Richard demanded $10,000 in immediate restitution, turning our family dinners into an aggressive courtroom. They expected me to pay out of sheer embarrassment, entirely unaware that the workshop's modern solar panel inverter maintained an unfalsifiable, millisecond-by-millisecond log of the electrical grid's true peak hour surge, uncovering a highly illegal midnight operation that Richard was desperately trying to hide from his insurance company. The tension in our family had always simmered just beneath the surface, but it found a permanent home the moment Richard married my husband's sister and moved on to the 5-acre family plot adjacent to ours. Richard was a man completely consumed by a tech bro persona. He wore expensive smart fabrics, spoke exclusively in corporate jargon, and spent nearly his entire inheritance building a detached, climate-controlled luxury workshop at the edge of his property line. He filled it with high-end, computerized lathe equipment, custom 3D printers, and automated fabrication tools, claiming he was launching an elite manufacturing consultancy. He frequently reminded the entire family that his workshop's electrical infrastructure was a marvel of modern engineering, operating on a dedicated sub-panel linked to a premium solar array, and warned everyone that even a minor voltage fluctuation could ruin his delicate calibration settings. My son, Leo, was a quiet, introverted teenager who built his own custom desktop computers as a hobby. He was highly knowledgeable about hardware engineering, which naturally made Richard view him as a technical rival rather than a nephew. Richard constantly patronized Leo's projects, calling his custom-cooled desktop rigs childish toys that wasted amateur bandwidth compared to the industrial infrastructure running in his workshop. Despite the constant condescension, Leo remained respectful, occasionally asking Richard technical questions about his solar setup, only to be met with dismissive remarks about how the teenager wouldn't understand high-voltage electrical architecture, everything. Fractured on a blistering Thursday morning when Richard came storming across our shared gravel driveway, his face flushed an angry crimson. He didn't knock. He practically threw our front door open, holding a charred, melted surge protector in his hands. He loudly announced to the entire household that his workshop's primary computer numerical control, CNC machine, had been completely fried, its main logic board melted by a massive, localized electrical overload. Before I could even ask what had happened, Richard pointed his finger directly at Leo, who was sitting at the kitchen island eating breakfast. He claimed that the previous evening, he had caught sight of Leo walking near the workshop perimeter with a heavy graphics processing unit under his arm, concluding that Leo had illegally tapped into the workshop's high-voltage lines to stress test an unapproved, power-hungry cryptocurrency mining rig or gaming server. The accusations escalated into a full-scale family crisis by Sunday evening. Richard called an emergency family meeting at my mother-in-law's house, presenting a formal, itemized invoice from his equipment supplier, totaling exactly $2,500 for emergency hardware replacements and diagnostic labor. My mother-in-law, completely enamored by Richard's self-proclaimed financial brilliance, immediately took his side. She openly wept at the dinner table, accusing my son of being an undisciplined saboteur who was actively ruining his uncle's business prospects out of jealousy. My husband, caught between his defensive family and his quiet son, looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression, suggesting that perhaps we should just pay the damages from our savings account to maintain family harmony and protect Leo from a formal civil lawsuit. I sat at the table, watching Richard smugly sip his wine while Leo stared down at his plate, his eyes welling with silent defensive tears. Leo repeatedly insisted that he hadn't stepped foot near the workshop since the previous month, explaining that the graphics card Richard saw him carrying was a broken part he was dropping off at the local recycling center. My parental instincts refused to let my son be a financial scapegoat for Richard's engineering failure. I knew that Richard's workshop was completely off-grid during peak sunlight hours, relying entirely on a premium cloud-managed solar inverter system to regulate its power consumption. I stood up, looked Richard dead in the eye, and told the family that we wouldn't be signing a single check until I conducted an independent forensic review of the workshop's electrical metrics. Richard merely laughed, a cold, arrogant sound, claiming that an amateur housewife wouldn't find anything in the technical logs but the electronic footprint of my son's negligence. Richard's smug confidence was based entirely on the assumption that I would never be able to access or interpret his proprietary system metrics. He didn't realize that when he originally installed the solar array 2 years ago, he had used a local green energy contracting firm where my oldest childhood friend, Maya, worked as a senior systems architect. Because the installation was still under a comprehensive commercial warranty, the data streams were continuously mirrored to the contractor's master enterprise database to monitor for grid compliance. The next morning, while Richard was busy meeting with his insurance adjuster to file a claim for the ruined equipment, I sat in Maya's office down at the municipal utilities building. With a few clicks of her mouse, she pulled up the complete, uneditable raw data telemetry for Richard's specific hardware ID, focusing on the 48-hour window surrounding the catastrophic electrical failure. A modern solar inverter acts as an absolute, impartial ledger of an electrical grid's daily life. It measures total solar generation, battery storage capacity, and building consumption down to the individual watt-second. As Maya exported the spreadsheet into a line graph visualization on her widescreen monitor, the data completely contradicted the narrative Richard had spun to the family. If your son had sneaked into that workshop to plug in a high-end custom computer, Maya explained, tracing her stylus along a steady, flat baseline of low-power draw on Wednesday afternoon, we would see a progressive, sustained spike of roughly 800 to 1200 watts starting around 4 or 5 o'clock. But look at his actual consumption profile. The workshop was pulling almost zero power all evening. It was completely dark. I leaned in closer, my eyes scanning the chronological log. Then what caused the logic boards to melt? Maya clicked her trackpad, zooming in tightly on the timestamp for Thursday morning at exactly 3:14 a.m. The flat line on the graph didn't just spike, it shot up vertically like a sheer cliff face, registering an astronomical, catastrophic power draw of 3,500 watts in a single, instantaneous surge. This isn't the footprint of a computer. Sarah, Maya said, her expression turning dead serious. A residential subpanel can't even draw this much juice without exploding unless it's pulling from a specialized, industrial-grade 3-phase capacitor bank. At 3 in the morning, while your son was fast asleep in his bed, someone in that workshop flipped a heavy industrial master switch, drawing a massive, uncontrolled load that completely overwhelmed the system's thermal limits and fried the entire electrical grid from the inside out. I stared at the timestamp, a cold wave of realization washing over me. I checked the local weather registry for that exact night. The sky had been completely clear, with 0 lightning strikes or external utility grid fluctuations reported anywhere in our district. The destruction had been entirely self-inflicted, generated by a massive piece of machinery that Richard had deliberately hidden from his basic property insurance policy. I thanked Maya, secured a certified, notarized copy of the complete digital log files on an external drive, and drove straight back to our property. Instead of confronting Richard privately, I decided to let him play his hand out to the very end. I called my husband and told him to schedule a final family meeting at our house for that evening, instructing him to tell his mother and Richard that we were ready to settle the $10,500 invoice. I knew that if I stopped Richard now, he would construct a defensive lie to protect his ego. I needed him to commit completely to his accusation in front of the entire family before I pulled the digital lever that would completely dismantle his financial credibility. When Richard walked into our living room at 7 o'clock, he practically floated with an air of absolute triumph. He brought an official-looking legal release document he had drafted himself, sliding it onto our coffee table alongside his gold pen. My mother-in-law sat beside him, nodding approvingly and lecturing my son, Leo, about the heavy cost of personal accountability. Richard leaned back in his armchair, crossing his legs and looking at me with a patronizing, pitying smile. "I'm glad you're finally doing the right thing, Sarah," Richard said, tapping the legal document with his finger. "Once you sign this and wire the funds, we can put this unfortunate chapter behind us. I won't even mention Leo's vandalism to his high school administration. It's all about keeping the family intact." I looked down at the paper, then up at my son, who was sitting quietly in the corner holding his breath. I slowly reached into my bag, pulled out my laptop, and plugged it directly into our large living room television screen. "I agree completely. Richard," I said, a calm, razor-sharp smile cutting across my face as the screen flashed to life, displaying the master system architecture logs from his own solar array. It is absolutely about accountability, which is why before I sign anything, I think the family deserves to see the exact millisecond by millisecond data of the true peak hour surge that ruined your workshop. The room went dead silent as the massive television screen filled with the bright, neon blue line graphs of the solar inverter telemetry log. Richard's patronizing smile instantly froze. He stared at the display, his analytical corporate mind recognizing the unmistakable interface of his green energy provider's master enterprise database. "What is this nonsense nonsense, Sarah," Richard scoffed, his voice jumping a full octave as he tried to stand up and block the screen. "You can't just download random internet templates and claim they represent my customized engineering system. This meeting is about Leo's restitution, not a tech slideshow." "Sit down, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, authoritative command that surprised even my husband. "This isn't a template. This is the certified, notarized telemetry log from your specific hardware array, mirrored directly to the municipal green energy database under your commercial warranty." I clicked the remote, highlighting the long, flat baseline that ran through Wednesday afternoon and late into the evening. "According to your accusation, Leo was in your workshop during the late afternoon, running an unapproved, power-hungry computer rig." I pointed at the flat line. "But as everyone can plainly see, the total power draw in your workshop at 5 o'clock was exactly 12 watts. Just enough to power your exterior security lights." "My son wasn't in your fortress, Richard. The entire building was completely dark." My mother-in-law blinked, squinting at the screen through her reading glasses, looking visibly confused. "But Sarah, if the boy didn't do it, then why is the equipment melted?" Richard said it was a massive overload. "Oh, it absolutely was an overload," I replied, clicking the remote to zoom in on the 3:14 a.m. timestamp. The line on the graph shot up like a jagged spear, maxing out the digital scale at an incredible 30,4,500 watts. "Look at the time, family. At 3:14 in the morning, while my son was sound asleep in his bed, a massive industrial-grade electrical draw occurred inside that workshop. It didn't come from a computer. It came from a 3-phase industrial capacitor bank being slammed into active operation. This wasn't external grid failure, and it wasn't a teenage gaming hobby. This was a catastrophic, self-inflicted thermal meltdown caused by a heavy industrial manufacturing asset." Richard's face drained of all color, turning a sickening, pasty white. He opened his mouth to speak, but only an incoherent stammer escaped his lips. His smug, untouchable facade was completely vaporized by the unfalsifiable machine data. "I called your green energy contractor, Richard," I continued, pressing the advantage. "They confirmed that drawing this specific wattage requires an unvented, commercial-grade crypto-mining rig or an illegal industrial smelting furnace, the exact type of heavy machinery that completely violates our neighborhood's residential zoning laws, and the exact type of hazard you explicitly swore you didn't own on your basic property insurance policy." The truth dropped into the living room like a lead weight. Richard hadn't been launching an elite manufacturing consultancy. He had been using his detached workshop as a front to run a high-density, unauthorized server operation under the cover of darkness to avoid paying commercial utility rates. He had pushed his home sub-panel past its absolute physical limits, fried his own logic boards, and then panicked when he realized his insurance company would deny the claim for fraud. He had calculated that framing my teenage son was the easiest way to extract $10,000 from our savings to cover his hidden financial disaster. My husband stood up, his jaw clenched as he looked from the undeniable data on the screen to his trembling brother-in-law. "You lied to us," my husband said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and deep betrayal. "You sat at my mother's table, called my son a saboteur, and tried to drain our family savings to cover up your illegal business?" My mother-in-law sat in stunned silence, her eyes darting between the graphs and her son-in-law's guilty, downward gaze. The tears she had shed for Richard's business prospects dried up instantly, replaced by a sudden, sharp realization of how completely she had been manipulated. Richard snatched his legal release document off the coffee table, crumpling it into his fist as he realized his leverage was completely gone. "This data is a complete misinterpretation of a standard electrical spike," he muttered defensively, though his voice lacked any conviction. He turned on his heel and practically fled from our house, slamming the front door behind him. The heavy silence that followed was broken by a long, deep sigh from Leo. I walked over to my son, wrapping my arms around his shoulders, letting him know without words that he would never have to defend his integrity against this family again. The next morning, I sent a certified digital copy of the solar telemetry files directly to the County Code Enforcement Office and Richard's primary insurance provider. Within 2 weeks, county inspectors issued a formal cease and desist order for the illegal commercial operation, and his insurance policy was promptly canceled for material misrepresentation. Richard and his sister moved out of the adjacent 5-acre plot before the end of the summer, unable to face our family after the absolute exposure of their fraud. Our gravel driveway is quiet now. The toxic manipulation has been completely filtered out, and the air on our property has never felt cleaner.